Vine stood in front of the large mirror in her bedroom, adjusting the collar of her tailored blazer. The woman staring back at her looked so different from the one who had once hovered outside Taehyung's office door. Clutching a lunchbox and hoping for a glimpse of his affection, she had came so far since that day, since that heartbreak. Three years had passed, each one filled with endless studying, late night assignments, and grueling exams, but it had all been worth it. Anne had graduated at the top of her class, proving not just to the world but to herself that she was capable of anything. Today she was a lawyer, a title she had earned with sweat, tears, and determination. But as proud as she was of what she had achieved, there was still a part of her life that remained unresolved, a weight that had been growing heavier with each passing day, her marriage to Taehyung. Van's finger absent-mindedly toyed with a simple silver band on her hand. The ring had once symbolized everything she had dreamed of, a future filled with love, trust, and partnership. But now it was a reminder of the distance between them, the hollow shell of a relationship that had long since crumbled. She hadn't been naive enough to think that their marriage would magically repair itself once she started law school. In fact, things had only gotten worse. Taehyung had grown more distant, if that was even possible. His coldness had deepened, and the few moments they shared at home felt forced. As if they were two strangers playing out roles in a script that neither of them believed in anymore. And Ryan, she had changed. The girl who had once sacrificed her dreams for the sake of her marriage was gone, replaced by a woman who had rediscovered her purpose. Law school had been her salvation, a lifeline that had given her sense of identity and strength that she hadn't realized she had lost. She had finally become someone she was proud of again, but that version of herself no longer fit within the confines of her marriage to Taehyung. Ryan knew deep down that she had already made her decision. She had known it the moment she walked across the stage at her graduation, her law degree in hand, the cheers of her classmates echoing in her ears. The sense of freedom she had felt in that moment had been intoxicating, and she realized that she couldn't return to the life she had been living before. She had to leave. She had to let Taehyung go. Wine sighed, slipping the ring off her finger and holding it between her thumb and forefinger. It felt strangely light, as if it no longer held any weight in her life. Her decision was final. She would ask Taehyung for a divorce. But how, despite everything, the thought of confronting him still filled her with a mix of anxiety and sadness. She knew that Taehyung had been as unhappy as she was, trapped in a marriage that neither of them had courage to walk away from. But now she had found her courage. Later that evening, Vine sat on the living room couch, her hands clasped together tightly as she waited for Taehyung to come home. It was the first time in a long time that she had felt nervous around him, the weight of what she was about to do pressuring down on her like a heavy stone. She heard the front door click open, followed by the sound of Taehyung's footsteps as he entered the house. He looked exhausted, his suit rumpled and his tie loosened, but he didn't greet her as he used to. He merely glanced in her direction before heading towards the kitchen. Taehyung, Vian said, her voice steady but firm. She had rehearsed these words over and over in her head, but now that the moment was here, her heart was pounding. He paused mid step, turning to face her. There was no warmth in her gaze, only a flicker of curiosity. What? Vian swallowed, standing up to face him. Come here. There's something I need to talk about. The young's expression darkened slightly, and he sighed, running a hand through his hair. Vian, if this is another conversation about trying to fix things, I'm not in the mood. It's late and I'm tired. Her heart clenched at his dismissive tone, but she didn't let it deter her. It's not about fixing things, she said quietly. It's about ending them. His eyes widened slightly, the words clearly taking him by surprise. What are you talking about? I want a divorce, Taehyung. Wan said, her voice unwavering even as she felt the weight of the statement settle between them. This marriage, it hasn't worked for a long time, and I think it's time we both admit that. For a moment there was silence. Taehyung simply stared at her as if trying to process the words she was saying. Then his expression hardened. You want a divorce, he repeated, disbelief coloring his voice. You're serious? Vine nodded, keeping her gaze steady. Yes, I've thought about this for a long time, and I've come to the conclusion that it's best thing for both of us. We're not happy, Taehyung. You know that. He let out a bitter laugh, shaking his head. So that's it. You go off to law college, get your degree, and now you think you can just walk away from everything? Her stomach twisted at the accusation in his voice, but she stood her ground. This isn't about law college, it's about the fact that we have both been miserable for years. And neither of us has been brave enough to admit it. You don't love me anymore, Taehyung. You don't even like me. Taehyung's face contoured in anger, but he didn't deny her words. Instead, he took a step closer, his voice low and venomous. You think you're so much better now, don't you? Now that you're a lawyer, now that you have your degree, you think you can just throw everything away like it means nothing? Van felt a pang of hurt at his words, but she didn't let it show. I'm not throwing anything away. I'm acknowledging that this marriage isn't working, and you know it's true, Taehyung. You've known it for a long time. Remember the day you were bad mouthing about me? You maybe don't, but I do, very clearly. Each and every word still rings in my ear. But I'm not trying to demean you, because I'm not like you. I know how to pay respect to my partner. He stared at her for a long moment, his anger fading into something more resigned. I don't know what you're talking about. Vine's heart ached as she looked at him, seeing the traces of the man she had once loved buried beneath the bitterness and resentment. You're not the guy I married, she said softly. We have both changed. I'm not the same person I was when we got married, and neither you are. And that's okay. But that's okay, because that means we need to let each other go. Taeyong sank down onto the couch, burying his face in his hands. After a long silence, Taeyong finally looked up at her, his voice quiet and defeated. I don't know what to say. You don't have to say anything, Van replied. I'll handle the legal process. I'll make sure everything is as smooth and painless as possible. I just need to move on, Taehyung, and so do you. He nodded slowly, as if the weight of her words was finally sinking in. Do you really think this is for the best? Yes, she whispered. I do. The next few weeks passed in a blur of paperwork and difficult conversations. Ryan filed for divorce, handling the legal proceedings herself with the same professionalism and grace she had applied to every case she had worked on since becoming a lawyer. Taehyung had been surprisingly cooperative. Of course, it's not like he loved her anymore. As the day of the final meeting approached, Ryan found herself reflecting on the journey she had taken. The girl who had once given up on her dreams for the sake of love was gone, replaced by a woman who knew her worth and had the strength to walk away from a relationship that no longer served her. On the day they signed the final divorce papers, Taehyung looked at her with an expression she hadn't seen in a long time, something resembling regret. I'm sorry, he said quietly, his voice barely above a whisper, for everything. Ryan met his gaze, feeling a strange sense of peace settle over her. She didn't reply and looked away. And with that, they signed their names, officially ending the marriage that had once meant everything to her. As Ryan walked out of the courthouse, she took a deep breath, the cool air filling her lungs with a sense of freedom she hadn't felt in years. The future was uncertain, but it was hers now, fully and completely. She had found her way back to herself, and that was all that mattered. It had been months since the divorce was finalized, but for Taehyung, the weight of it hadn't lifted. In fact, it had only grown heavier. The silence in the apartment they had once shared was suffocating, and the absence of Ryan, who had once filled every corner with warmth and life, left a hollow void that echoed louder with each passing day. He sat alone in the living room, a glass of whiskey in his hand, his eyes unfocused as he stared out the window. The city outside bustled with life, moving on with their lives, while Taehyung remained stuck in the past, trapped by the choices he had made. It wasn't just the divorce itself that haunted him, it was everything that had led up to it. The coldness he had shown her, the distance he had created between them, and worst of all, the things he had said. His mind kept returning to that day in the office, the day Ryan had brought him lunch. He had been so frustrated, so caught up in his own world, that he hadn't realized that she was standing outside the door. He could still hear the cruel words he had spoken to his secretary, dismissing Ryan as if she were some clingy, desperate woman who was beneath him. The memory made his stomach twist with guilt. He had been so blinded by his own dissatisfactions, so consumed by the pressure of his career and the stagnation of their relationship that he hadn't seen how much he was hurting her. Ryan had given everything to their marriage, her love, her time, her dreams, and he had thrown it all away with careless words and thoughtless actions. Taehyung took a long sip of his whiskey, the burning liquid doing nothing to dull the ache in his chest. He had convinced himself at that time that the problem was her, that she was the reason he felt so trapped, so suffocated. But now, with the clarity that came from months of separation, he could see the truth. He was the problem. Ryan had done nothing wrong. She had only loved him, only wanted to build a life with him, and he had pushed her away. He had taken her for granted, assuming she would always be there, waiting for him, no matter how cold or distant he became. But she hadn't waited, she had left, and now he sat alone in the empty apartment. Taehyung was forced to confront the painful reality of his actions. He had lost her, the one person who had loved him unconditionally, the one person who had believed in him even when he didn't believe in himself. His thoughts drifted back to the day Wyan told him she wanted a divorce. At the time, he had been angry, defensive, unable to see beyond his ego. He had thought she was being selfish, that she was giving up on them too easily, but now he realized that she had been the brave one. She had been the one to recognize that their marriage was broken beyond repair, and she had been strong enough to walk away. Taehyung wasn't sure if he would have had that kind of strength. He rubbed a hand over his face, the regret settling deep in his bones. Van had moved on with her life, and he had watched from a distance as she thrived. She had gone back to law school, graduated with honors, and now she was building the career she had once dreamed of. She was finally living for herself, no longer held back by the weight of their failed marriage. And where was he? Stuck in the past, drowning in regret. He hadn't seen her since the day they signed the divorce papers, and the part of him was grateful for that. He wasn't sure he could face her, knowing how much he had hurt her. But another part of him longed to see her, to apologize, to tell her how sorry he was for everything. But what good would that do now? Ryan had moved on, and Taehyung was left with nothing but his regrets. He stood up from the couch, wandering over to the bookshelf, his fingers brushing against the spine of books Wine had left behind. Most of her things were gone, but there were still small remnants of her scattered throughout the apartment. A law textbook here, a framed photo there. Each one was a painful reminder of the life they had once shared, a life he had destroyed with his own hands. His eyes landed on a photo of the two of them from their wedding day. They looked so happy, so full of hope and promise. And smile was radiant, her eyes filled with love as she looked at him, and he had been so sure that they would be together forever. Taehyung picked up the photo, his thumb tracing the edge of the frame. How had they gone from that to where they were now? How had he let it all slip away? He sat back down, the photo still in his hands, and allowed himself to feel the full weight of his regret. He had lost her, and there was no getting her back. Wine was better off without him, and he knew it. But that didn't stop the ache in his chest, the deep sense of loss that gnawed at him every day. For months he had tried to push the feelings away, to bury himself in his work, his friends, anything that would distract him from the emptiness inside. But no matter how hard he tried, he couldn't escape the truth. He missed her. He missed everything about her. The way she laughed, the way she lit up the room, the way she had always believed in him, even when he didn't deserve it. Taehyung closed his eyes, the weight of his regret pressing down on him like a physical burden. He wished he could turn back time and go back to the moment when things had started to go wrong and fix it. But it was too late for that now. All he could do was live with the regret, knowing that he had lost the one person who had truly mattered, and no amount of apologies or self recrimination could change that. Taehyung placed the photo back on the shelf and sat in the silence of the apartment, the weight of his choices pressing down on him. He had no one to blame but himself. And he knew deep down that he would carry this regret for the rest of his life. Hello everyone, if you've read till here, then please like, share, and subscribe because it helps me get motivated and keep going. Also, do follow me on Instagram at LustriousFFs, of course. Yeah, that's it. That's the end. Goodbye.